What's going on, people? Welcome back to Curtis Shaw TV, back with another transfer special. And there's only one man to bring on the show when it comes to transfer season, and that is friend of the channel, Ben Jacobs. How are you, my friend?
Great to be back. Look at your flex, Henry and Bergkamp behind you. New York Knicks cap on. Looking good, my friend.
Well, I'm trying. As Arsenal fans, we have to revisit the past to feel good. So, Bergkamp and Henry. And actually, I saw Dennis Bergkamp had an event on last night. I believe you was there, wasn't you? Was it the Football Writers dinner? Dennis Bergkamp,
Yeah, this
Henry,
was
Ian Wright.
this was celebrating Dennis Bergkamp, and there was a star-studded Arsenal lineup. We heard from Ian Wright and Arsene Wenger, and then Dennis Bergkamp was honoured on stage. His family was there, and I'll tell you something, he looks exactly like he did in his playing days. And we saw this wonderful montage that was put together by colleagues at Sky Sports, and naturally it had many of the goals, and he made it very clear that he meant the Newcastle one, which I think Arsenal fans will know anyway. And you may
Oh,
know
yeah.
that I'm a Leicester fan, so I was there at Filbert Street for that incredible hat trick, which I think is just about the most perfect kind of hat trick that you can score in terms of skill and technique. I know people sort of say left foot, right foot, head, and all of that, but you look at Dennis Bergkamp and you say, how can I epitomise him? And that hat trick said everything. But I must just say one thing, because people always say Bergkamp, hat trick, incredible, Leicester. Let's not forget, and I don't mean to kind of rub salt in the Arsenal wounds, but enough time has passed, hasn't it? After he got that hat trick, Leicester went down the other end and equalised.
Okay. Yeah, we don't like to acknowledge that, Ben. We just focus on and you know what? You just said Bergkamp looks the same. Well, if he feels the same as he did when he was in his 20s, maybe he could get his boots back on. But listen, obviously we want to delve into transfers, and Arsenal fans, I mean, you probably get messages all the time. Arsenal fans are so desperate to see transfers come in. We got injuries. We're short, particularly at the top of the pitch. I just want to go through a few individual names and just see what you know and what you think may happen with those. And then we'll sort of round up. Obviously, we're conscious of time. You're very busy today. A big report came out on Saturday from Pete O'Rourke, I believe, who said that Arsenal were exploring the possibility of a move for Victor Osimhen. Now, nobody else has really reported that apart from him. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions just around that deal. Number one, Victor Osimhen's on loan at Galatasaray from Napoli. Is it possible for a club to buy him and get him out of that loan during this window? Second of all, we heard in the summer that they wanted like 100 million for him, Napoli. People are now saying around 65 million might get him out. And just thirdly, I know I'm throwing questions at you here. Have you heard anything of Arsenal being interested in Victor Osimhen in this window?
Yeah, I think Victor Osimhen is probably more a summer saga. He's relatively happy in Turkey at the moment, so I'm not aware that anybody can really prize him away without paying the release clause. And the reason why people are saying the number has dropped is because Napoli were insisting on this 120 to 130 million euros release clause over the summer. Now, after Victor Osimhen went to Turkey, the release clause has dropped to 75 million euros, which does present a more market value opportunity, but for the summer rather than now. And in addition to that, Victor Osimhen's perspective hasn't changed. Number one, he wants £250,000 a week or more in terms of wages. And oddly, he still is only intent on a permanent move. And I only say oddly because you would think that after the whole furore and chaos of deadline day, the player's perspective might have changed somewhat. You had a situation where Chelsea were trying to negotiate personal terms, but they said, you've got to fit into our wage structure and we want an initial loan. And if we don't get that, then we're not prepared to proceed. And Osimhen said, I only want a permanent move and I'm sticking to my wage demands. And then Saudi came calling, but ended up signing Ivan Toney. And at the end of all of that, Osimhen was left with no club, which is astonishing when you think for much of the summer, it was relatively obvious that he was going to have to find a solution to leave Napoli. Then he goes on loan and you might think maybe the player will be a bit more flexible, whether January or whether the summer, but that's not my understanding. He still only wants a permanent move, which means that the structure going forwards, whenever that may be feasible, has to be loan with obligation or, of course, just a straight sale. The wage demands are the same, and he feels that his value as a player has only gone up because his release clause has gone down. So therefore,
Yeah.
more suitors may feel the fee is very market value or thereabouts. And Napoli are going to be a bit strong on too, because everybody now knows that after the summer and no solution was found, and with Romelu Lukaku arriving, it's over between Napoli and Osimhen. So suitors, particularly I think in the summer, are going to be in a strong position. But as far as Arsenal are concerned, I'm really not hearing much. I don't think there's any chance of anybody getting Osimhen in January unless we get some crazy bid in the final kind of 2 weeks or so of the window. So I'm told there's other more viable targets. And I use the word plural, which is my sort of hope for Arsenal fans to kick off this podcast, because I think there is a realistic chance that if they can, they bring in somebody now that is realistic and feasible and economical, and then still go for one of the other big names, Benjamin Sesko, Alexander Isak, if that somehow becomes possible in the summer. So we might not just be looking at the striker we've been speaking about for so long. We might actually be talking about multiple strikers coming in, one now if possible, and then certainly another one in the summer.
I mean, you mentioned Benjamin Sesko there. Again, we had reports last week, all of a sudden Arsenal are going to go for him now. They're not going to wait until the summer. His agent then does a television interview saying there's no way that he can go on loan. You know, he's too big a player to go on loan. But he seemed to leave the door open that, you know, you'll have to ask Arteta if he wants him, and it depends on the price and this, that, the other. Again, with Cesco, is that more of a summer deal? Is it, if Arsenal were to put enough money down now, do you think Leipzig would let him go now, or is it just, again, another summer transfer?
Yeah, that's the big challenge dealing with Leipzig now, especially when the player could have moved in the summer and kind of committed to a full season. So this isn't so much about a player having his head turned and saying, I want to go in January, as a player that knows he can leave in the summer to one of many big clubs and felt that the best path for his development was to stay a full season at Leipzig. So what would actually have to change is the player's perspective that now is the right time to move, because he's not worried if he turns down any approaches now that he won't have the same opportunities in the summer. And as I've reported many times, I think Benjamin Sesko and Arsenal is one to watch because the interest is strong. And unlike Alexander Isak, the overall package is significantly less in terms of fee, in terms of agent fees, in terms of wages. So this is one that Arsenal, I think, will work on in 2025. Putting down money now would have to have a permanence to it and have that player buy-in. So it's getting those sort of two ticks. And at the moment, I'll be honest with you, I think the situation is unclear. I know a lot of people just want to hear yes, no, will he move, won't he move? But I think there's that small window of opportunity with Cesco where, as you allude to, if Arsenal went really big now and it had permanence to it, there might be an opportunity, but more likely the summer. And there's that halfway house situation like Chelsea did with Christopher Nkunku, where maybe you try and get ahead of the market, like they're kind of doing with Martin Zubimendi, try and pre-agree something now to make sure you fend off all the other suitors, and then he ends up joining in the summer. And I think with Cesco, as I've reported several times now, but to reiterate in case you haven't heard what I've put out there before, Benjamin Cesco had offers from 3 Premier League clubs, Arsenal, Manchester United, Chelsea. And I'm told by sources that he picked Arsenal as a project. Then it became a straight choice between, do I go to Arsenal summer 2024 or do I extend at Leipzig? And that extension, he felt in the end, was better for his development. So Arsenal feel that the players sold on the project, sold on Arteta, sold on London, sold on the wages or the overall package that he's been presented. It's just trumping all of that is, it's better to stay and do that extra year, get the regular minutes, continue scoring goals, not get maybe swallowed up at a big club. And how many times are we seeing young strikers come over, or even in their early 20s, your Rasmus Højlunds, your Joshua Zirkzees, your Christopher Nkunku's even at Chelsea, they're coming into these big clubs, huge ceilings, they're all going to end up being incredible players, but they're not playing as often as at their previous club. And I think Cesco just feels that extra season might give him the best opportunity of wherever he goes to next, being able to dive straight in and play regularly. So he's very grounded, and it's a very sensible approach in many ways. I know it's not always what Arsenal fans want to hear, but it's quite reassuring to have a player that says, you know what, I'm not just going to be lured by the move now, the finances now, the glamour, the fame. I'm going to do what's right for my career, because then when he finally goes to wherever the next destination is. He'll feel that he's a better player, more developed, more mature, and that's only going to benefit his next club. So for me,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I've always had this feeling that Cesco ends up at Arsenal in the summer for some reason, but we'll have to see with that one. I suppose it's a waiting game. I think the striker that many Arsenal fans dream of coming to the club is, and I think I'm going to say already, is Alexander Isak, and obviously we saw his quality in the Carabao Cup semi-final when he scored against us and played a part in the second goal. Has that deal now reached a point potentially where it's too far away from us? I mean, I've seen reports now Newcastle are going to want over 100 million. It could be a British transfer record. It just doesn't feel like Arsenal would invest that kind of money with the wages, with the signing on fee. Has he reached a point now where Arsenal may struggle to get him? And will Newcastle even allow him to go in the summer?
Yeah, the big question is where will Newcastle be in the summer? And that will dictate the situation of Alexander Isak, but also Bruno Guimaraes in likelihood, and very possibly Anthony Gordon. And the feeling I get within the industry because of Newcastle's financial situation is if they don't get Champions League football, then one of the three stars will go, perhaps only one. And it's up to Newcastle to determine whether, for example, it's Bruno Guimaraes and Man City reignite some summer interest, whether it's Liverpool coming back in for Anthony Gordon, or whether it's Arsenal and Alexander Isak. And the Arsenal dream may be Isak, but as you rightly say, the price makes it a very problematic deal, because I don't even think we're talking 100 million. I don't even think we're talking Moises Caicedo 115. I think at the moment we're talking pushing 150 million pounds. And Arsenal fans will be laughing perhaps at that number. But remember, clubs that don't want to sell, they add that extra 20, 30, 40 million onto the so-called asking price to ward off the market. And it's normal at this stage that Newcastle are doing exactly that, fending off suitors by saying untouchable, by saying astronomical price if you're going to change our mind, because right now they're still fighting in the mix for Champions League football. But Arsenal would be smart to wait, enter the summer, see where Newcastle are, and in that build up to the next PSR deadline, because regardless of the long-term future of PSR and the financial rules, 2024, 2025 is still a PSR year. So Newcastle will know that they once again have to balance the books. And at the end of the day, if they don't have the assets to get to that potentially 40, 50, 60 million that they need, a big star may have to depart. And I say 40, 50, 60 million because that was the case and the number in the summer. And all indications are without Champions League football, they'll need a similar amount of money coming in. So do you sell Miguel Almiron and Callum Wilson this window, bring in collectively 20, 25 million, look to get Sean Longstaff out the door, entertain an offer for Kieran Trippier? You're probably still collectively only at 40, 45 million in a best case scenario. Or do you say, we don't want to desecrate our squad, and we know that Eddie Howe values a lot of the older players in the team, even if they're not playing every week, and instead just lose one name and maybe have some pocket change to reinvest as well? But I don't think we see a scenario where 3 of 3 go. I don't think it's likely they'll sell 2 of the 3. So this Alexander Isak case is complicated. First of all, because you have to wait. Like I say, do Newcastle get Champions League football? If they don't, the price may drop significantly. Second of all, is it intertwined with other clubs' pursuits of other Newcastle stars? And what if Liverpool got Gordon first? Does that take Alexander Isak off the table? And the final aspect, just to stress, is that Isak is well contracted. So we hear a lot of reports out there that Newcastle are going to offer Isak a new deal, and that will end the saga in the short term. But even if the player doesn't agree anything, he's healthily contracted. So Newcastle have protected his value. And this is why I think Isak is going to be not impossible, but difficult, and quite clearly only the summer. And it is a wait and see story, whereas Cesco, like I said to you before, is more viable. They've already done the groundwork. He's sold on the project, and the overall cost of that outlay for Cesco is much, much cheaper. So as of now, I would say Cesco feels more realistic than Isak. But how do Arsenal rank Isak and Cesco? It may be that if they could get Isak, that would end up being their top choice, despite the fact that they really like Sesko. In an ideal world, they'd probably say, let's just take both, because there might be some outgoings in the forward line too. So I know people want that kind of clear-cut answer, but I would stress that windows are fluid and complicated, and we are predicting summer movement without really having the full context of where Newcastle are going to be. And that's why I think we need to be cautious about saying definitely won't be sold or definitely will be 150 million, because that's Newcastle's position now. But let's wait and see if it's identical come the summer.
Yeah, no, you make some great points there. I think, like you said, the Champions League will dictate a lot when it comes to Newcastle. Just looking at maybe shorter term solutions there, because, you know, maybe Arsenal are not going to spend big money in this window. We don't often spend huge money in January. Have you heard any rumblings of any shorter term solutions? Are there any? I mean, we've heard Mateus Cunha, but again, he would be expensive. And, you know, he was apparently going to sign the deal, seems to have stalled a little bit. We know Arteta loves Nico Williams, but again, very expensive, difficult to get in January. Is there any rumblings from your perspective?
Yeah, a couple of rumblings. So the first name that I've put out there is Gabriel Jesus, who has already won 4 caps for Brazil. He's 23 years of age. This is kind of an Edu legacy deal, if you like, and some groundwork was done for him. He's at Botafogo. It's a good time, of course, to buy off a club in the Brazilian Serie A because of how their calendar falls. So this is kind of like their summer window, and clubs are a bit more conducive to doing business as a result compared to the summer when they're in the middle of their own seasons. And the output for somebody that's still developing wasn't too bad in the Brazilian Serie A. It was only his first season there because he was at a club called Shabab Al Ahly before that. And the profile fits what Arsenal are looking for. Relatively young, but still able to translate quite well into first team football, because I think he's 23 years of age, rather than necessarily somebody that's like 18, 19, and you think they're going to need a little bit of time to settle. It's unclear at this stage, because he's not been there for that long, whether Botafogo would be prepared to sell. But again, a more economical option, and somebody that from the players' side, there is a feeling might be available within the January window. So now we just have to wait and see whether, with Edu gone, Arsenal choose to escalate that deal, because we're not at a concrete approach or bid stage, but we know that things could move very fast in the window. So that could be one to keep an eye on. And then, even though, again, it may not be that popular with Arsenal fans, and I preface this by saying there might be that short term or that slightly less excitable name that fills the void due to injuries to Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Jesus. And then it's not at the expense of a Cesco or an Isak, etc. So there may be a case where 2 come in, and one is a needs must signing that just adds depth and hopefully a few goals, and the other is still that big name in the summer, because this is a seller's market and buyers are in a very difficult position in the January window. And to get the deal they want, they often have to wait late and make the seller sweat. And then sometimes the deal never gets done because time is just ticking. But sellers know that a buyer in January will usually have urgency due to injury, due to poor form, and the price goes up. And the seller, I would say 7 or 8 times out of 10, tends to get a better deal in the January window than the buyer, financially speaking anyway. But with all that said, you look at a player like Evan Ferguson, and I've reported this many times, and I think it's quite widely circulated now, also there on Arsenal's radar as well. And the challenges are, number one, Brighton haven't decided whether or not they're prepared to sanction an exit. Number two, the player's picked up an injury. And number three, other clubs like West Ham are thinking, we'll do a loan. But Arsenal can't do that because they've filled their Premier League quota. And I can tell you, with Raheem Sterling, there's no ability to recall. There's nothing in January that allows for a break. So he's definitely going to be staying. And therefore, it's very difficult for Arsenal to do something economical. They can't do a loan with an obligation. Their quota's full. They can't buy outright unless the price drops significantly. And it'll be interesting to see what Brighton's valuation is. Because remember, if we flash back to maybe, 12, 18 months ago when Evan Ferguson was on fire, the Brighton perspective with Arsenal looking and Chelsea looking was this is a 75 to 85 million pound player, ballpark. And I say ballpark because Brighton don't give a specific number, but the feeling from sources is that he's going to cost a heck of a lot of money, and somewhere even pushing 100 million. Now you would argue that that market value and that asking price has maybe halved. So is there still that potential if the player moves into the right team, stays fit, and you can get them comparative to 12, 18 months ago at a steal? And I think Arsenal would consider that. It's just whether or not it's actually doable, because they can't loan, they can't structure it like they did with David Raya. They have to outright buy because they filled their Premier League quota. And if they didn't and had a loan spot, then I think Ferguson and Arsenal might be something to watch in the shorter term, still with a view to adding another striker come summer 2025.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that input. I'm going to finish off with a couple of questions and then we'll round up, because I know you're a very busy man today. I just wondered, first of all, is there any opportunity to get players from the Saudi league on loan? Because some people were saying, I remember last year they were talking about Firmino. I heard Rio Ferdinand saying Arsenal should get Benzema on loan, and some people have been saying Ivan Toney. Is there a situation where those clubs will loan players? I know their league finishes at a different time, or is that very difficult?
Yeah, I mean, the league is basically the same calendar. So the only difference is that Saudi have a winter break, but now they're back playing in January and it will run through until the summer. There's an element of opportunism due to the fact that a lot of the Saudi teams have got full quotas of foreigners. So there are some that are either deregistered and can't play in the Saudi Pro League, or because a new signing is coming to Saudi, the clubs, particularly the PIF ones, will want to move some players along. I don't think Benzema counts as an opportunity to bring on loan for half a season. I'd be surprised if that kind of deal was sanctioned. You may remember West Ham tried for N'Golo Kante, and that was shot down as well. Neymar is maybe the big one that's gettable, but it's Santos that are in talks, and I think that one might get over the line on a loan. But even that, you have the Al Hilal perspective, which is we'll loan him, but we actually would like him back for the Club World Cup. And because he's a free agent in the summer, if he's going to go out, he actually has to commit to extending so he can play in the Club World Cup, which means that they lose a star name, and the optics of that are not necessarily right in many people's eyes, particularly in PIF and government. But then if he extends, he's still an Al Hilal player, so they can bring him back for the Club World Cup. And Al Ahly did that when they sent Alan St. Maximin to Turkey. It's a loan, but as of now, at least, he's still an Al Ahly player. So there's one or two there. Mitrovic is somebody that a few clubs have inquired about. Ruben Neves as well, a former Arsenal target, to see whether or not these type of players are available. But there is a reticence to do mid-season business in Saudi Arabia. What I would say is in the summer, I think you're going to get a scenario where there's a lot more two-way traffic, because the Saudi perspective will be some of their younger players like Gabri Vega at Al Ahly, for example, will have raised in value because they're playing alongside stars. And due to squad refreshes, because at the moment the quotas are full and they'll keep wanting to bring in new foreign stars, you will see Saudi selling players and potentially at a profit back to Europe. But I'm still told that's more summer, and they don't want too many mid-season exits. So it will be difficult for Arsenal to be in the conversation for Benzema. I also don't think that's the right kind of profile. It's not the right fit for what they're looking for. Somebody a little bit older that's maybe there temporarily, that would have expectations they would play every week on a big wage, used to being around other big stars. You come in there, and then what happens if he's benched? What happens if somebody comes back into form or fitness earlier than expected? Then you fall down the pecking order. And Chelsea had this with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, where they signed him in a panic because they needed a striker in the first window under Clearlake Bowley. Thomas Tuchel got sacked. Aubameyang was basically just sitting there for 6 months, completely out of the fold, and it caused a really awkward situation. So at this stage, I don't think Saudi to Arsenal is particularly likely. And then just coming back to the Cunha or the Nico Williams situation, Mateus Cunha has verbally agreed the terms with Wolves, aside from one key thing, which is a release clause. And it's unclear whether the player is going to push for 2 release clauses. So there's certainly one being discussed, which is if Wolves go down, he can leave below market value for somewhere in the region of 40-45 million pounds, which would be a fantastic bit of business for anybody. And then the question is, what if he extends and they stay up? is there another number still in and around market value that allows somebody to trigger that? And sometimes when a player signs a contract, it's still with a view to leaving relatively imminently. So the player, I'm told, has agreed everything in terms of length and wage and bonuses, but he won't actually sign the thing until they get to the bottom of this either release clause based on relegation or release clauses inclusive of if Wolves stay up. So Arsenal are going to be alert to that situation. And until he signs, it's a relatively open saga. To get him now, they're going to have to drop something in the region of 80 to 90 million pounds. And I just don't think they've got the money. And I think it would frustrate Arsenal fans to an extent if they dropped that type of money on a Cunha, when instead you could put it on a real traditional number 9. So if it's 90 million on Cunha, why isn't it 90 million on Isak or 90 million on Osimhen or whatever? Or
yeah.
Even if he doesn't sign a new deal at Wolves, very difficult. Nico Williams could be a market opportunity as far as the summer is concerned. But remember, you've got the release clause, which is relatively tempting. You've got the taxes, which are variable. So you add that on top, and it definitely enhances the cost of the deal. And then in addition to that, the player himself is on a very good wage now and would expect more if he's to leave. So that is also relatively difficult to get over the line. But I think in the summer, we will see Arsenal be quite aggressive on that left side. And now I think they're just looking as to whether they can find the right profile and fit on either right or number 9. So by the time we perhaps get to the end of the summer window, you might be looking at a scenario where there's Bukayo Saka cover, there's a predominant left-sided attacker, and there's one, even 2 number 9s. But of those 4, let's just say 2 number 9s plus your right and your left. That's your whole front line being revamped. And it might mean that Gabriel Jesus departs in the summer or something like that to make way. But I suppose my point is, if you're that ambitious to get those 4 names, and potentially 3 of them are all going to be very costly in terms of fee and wage, you either need a scenario where you have to wait a little bit to do some of your spend on the next financial year, or you have to do the bulk of your business in the summer. And I think the last thing Arsenal want to do is spend money if finances are relatively tight in PSR calculations in January for the sake of it, and then find it's at the expense of some of the summer business that they're confident of executing. And remember, that might also include a big outlay for Martin Zubimendi as well.
I'm going to ask you one final question, because I know you push for time. You're on TalkSport shortly, so I'll let you get going. I just wanted to ask, if Arsenal had an opportunity in January to maybe get one of their summer targets, let's just say a Sesko or an Osimhen is available now at the right price, do you think Arsenal can put down 65 million for Osimhen or 70 million for Cesco or an 80 million for Gyökeres? Are we in a position where we can spend that? Because we're always confused as to why we see other clubs outlay big money in January and Arsenal never seem to do that.
Yeah, some of it is because they had that big summer when Declan Rice arrived. Some of it is because the Raya deal is structured in a way, almost as I describe it, like a credit card, where it feels feasible because of how the original formula was. But at some point, you're paying that off. And unfortunately for Arsenal, it's in this current financial year. So all of these delayed payments or all of these preferable payment terms in the short term eventually come back to bite you. And this is why when people sort of say, amortization, isn't it great? How are Chelsea getting away with it? They're spreading the cost, they're spreading the cost, they're spreading the cost. Eventually, you get 4, 5, 6 years down the line, and you're spreading the cost from so many different transfer windows that if each annual amortized number is small, you might have 12 of them. And if they are, let's just call it 2 to 5 million a year, you're starting immediately with a big financial hole where maybe you've got to sell a player in order to offset that on your annual books. So amortization is not a cheat code. It's a delay tactic that creatively navigates you through the short term on your books, but does give you a longer term liability that if you keep signing that way, eventually all the money adds up. So Arsenal have got a bit of pre-existing. They've got the Marino finances to drop a significant individual transfer fee now and that player to arrive. So yes, if an opportunity in a hypothetical situation came where Cesco said, I want to move now, and Leipzig said, you can sign him now, I think Arsenal, financially speaking, would be able to do it. But the appreciation at the club is if they escalate something that is a big financial outlay that was planned for the summer for now, it's going to have a knock-on effect towards the summer, where then they have to say, well, we spent some of our money early. So it's just a bit of a balancing act, especially in the first half of the summer window, because you're building up to that PSR deadline. And a lot of clubs, again, I expect in the summer, will have to do a series of mirrored deals. So if Arsenal want Isak, I think it very likely that they try and find a player that Newcastle might want in return and do a mirrored deal to make the overall package a little bit more economical. So clubs have learned how to navigate, and they've replaced the sort of old school swap deal with mirrored or separate deals, whatever you want to call it. And the reason for that is because when you bring in your player, you can spread that cost over a period that might end up navigating you through the PSR era. And then if the UEFA squad cost control measures come in, you have a little bit more financial leeway to work with. And similarly, the one that you settle, you can put straight on your annual books. So you have a situation where if you do two deals separately with the same club, you actually can bring yourself out of a financial hole in the short term, but you still have to be sure, like I said before, that money you owe won't just linger on your books for such a long period of time that if you keep signing and signing and signing, it's like racking up a credit card debt. So the short answer, not that I ever really give one, but the short answer is that if they wanted to buy now, I'm told they could, but it's just that awareness that it may impact their overall summer spend if they do.
Yeah. No, listen, Ben, we appreciate the detailed answers. That's what we got you on the show for. I'm going to let you go. I know you're on TalkSport shortly. Thank you very much for giving up your time. Make sure people follow Ben Jacobs on, well, I still call it Twitter, but it's X. So for the latest updates, thank you for giving up your time, mate. Appreciate it.
Yeah, keep up the good work, and let's hope Arsenal have a successful end of the window and a strong second half of the season.
Let's hope so. And for your sake, Leicester, you want them to stay up. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. Hit the like button and subscribe, people.